where certain temperatures around Spokane, and then these have started to fluctuate, because we're on cycles, not anthropogenic global warming or anything like that, but we're on natural cycles that God has designed after the flood.
Right.
They're big, long cycles, so if you build your houses with too small duct systems and then the temperatures start to rise, well, I learned that no matter what you do with your air conditioning unit, you're not going to produce more cooling. Because the ducts are only so big, so it can only, let so much cool air go through the system. Anyway, here we are stuck. A lot of places didn't even have air conditioning, right? This place doesn't have air conditioning. Okay, because you guys are so cool that it wasn't needed. Especially you, John, but you don't need to hear that, I know. Yes, Megan.
There is a praise report that somebody supplied an air conditioner for that Sunday school room back there for the weekend conference. And it was a lifesaver, even though your daughters wore their sweaters in the morning.
Yeah, I believe, okay. That is great that somebody did provide air conditioning for that room. They do, I know. My girls, they'll be covered up in blankets, like if we sit down and watch a movie, and I'm like, it's 100 degrees outside. What are you doing? They're like, you want to share? You, Daddy? And I'm like, no. I love you. You're close enough. That's enough heat. Okay. Pray for AC. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, if you're here, Jesus didn't have AC. Like the Pharisees definitely didn't have AC. Well, the Sadducees for that matter. So I think we can handle it, right? All right. Let's get in fellowship with the Lord, right? 1 John 1:9. Then we want to go back to Samuel. We're making pretty good progress. We're going to cover a couple chapters tonight, which will be pretty good. And let's pray also let's not forget later tonight to pray for Linda, since, you've noticed Todd and Lynn aren't here, so he's having to take care of her, and some things are going on, doesn't know what. So, also pray for Dave Olson, right? Because Damon right here, he's a listener from the other side of the country, and he's here to work with Dave tomorrow and on his conditions and stuff. It's going to be neat to see what the Lord does with this, all this together. So some of you don't know about that, some of you do, but anyway, the Lord works in mysterious ways. He is in control of all of history, and he can orchestrate things that are beyond our imagination or ability to organize it. So he's brought this together, and let's pray for that. Okay? But right now, let's just get fellowship with the Lord, right? And we'll go to 1 Samuel chapter 5 and 6 tonight to see what lessons we can learn from this important chapter. Let's pray. Father, you are gracious, remarkably gracious. You have no necessary requirement within yourself to bring us to yourself and bring us into a relationship with you through the Lord Jesus Christ. But you created all of this, and we destroyed it, and you decided you wanted to salvage it. And we get to be part of the salvage, not just wreckage anymore in Adam, but perfect in the Lord Jesus Christ. And you have lessons for us through every page of Scripture. It's our prayer and desire that you will teach us your precepts. Teach us about yourself, and so that we are humble, so that we are in awe and respect of you, and that we appreciate all that we have in Christ and everything that you have in store for us. It's just the beginning to taste salvation and justification. It's just the beginning to enjoy salvation anew as we overcome obstacles in the Christian life. And then to know that ahead of us still lies our resurrection and the world to come when we rule and reign with Christ in the new heaven and new earth. It's more than we can fathom. It's more than we can capture in our finite minds. So, but help us to have a grander picture of all that you have for us. And teach us tonight through the ark, through its travels, through Philistia and back to Israel, lessons you were trying to teach the Philistines and the lesson you were trying to teach Israel. And see how men respond and make sure we adjust our response to you accordingly. We ask this in Jesus' precious name. Okay, we're going to be in these chapters, but 5 and 6. But before that, remember, the first 3 chapters really focuses on the first main character of the book, who is Samuel. He's kind of departed from view to chapters 4, 5, and 6, but he's going to come back in chapter 7. Okay? Then we'll move on to the second major character of the book, who's going to be King Saul. And then the last, or third character of the book, which is David. Okay? So far what we've seen, the big principle is over in chapter 2, verse 30, where the Lord said, he who honors me, I will honor, and the one who dishonors me, I will lightly esteem. And so it's very important to honor the Lord, and picture that as Hannah. It's embodied in her, and her patiently waiting as a barren wife, wanting to have a child, and then the Lord is faithful as he honors her and answers her prayer and gives her Samuel. And she dedicates him to the Lord, so he was to serve in the temple. Now someone asked, by the way, you can always ask a question, you just send it to me in email or just write it down, put it up or whatever. Somebody asked me, like, how is it that Samuel could actually serve as a prophet since he was from Ephraim? That's 1 Samuel 1, verse 1 tells us, the very first verse of the book, that his father was from Ephraim, an Ephraimite. Actually, he was not a descendant of Ephraim. Okay? He just lived in the territory of Ephraim. And that's what that note means. If you look at 1 Chronicles 6 and you look at the genealogy of his family, you'll find that Samuel's father was a descendant of Kohath. And Kohath was one of the priests. So they weren't the high priestly line, but they were a priestly line, a descendant from Aaron. And so he could serve as a priest. And this person has another question too. We'll get to that later. Basically, the question was, how is it in 1 Samuel 17 that Saul doesn't know who David is? In 1 Samuel, I think it's 15 or 16, David was basically playing the harp in the court of King Saul, and then later he doesn't even recognize him. So anyway, we'll talk about that then. You do need to remember, of course, that Saul's going to have a double personality, right? He's afflicted by evil spirits, and then other times he seems the same. So it's kind of one of these almost like a bipolar type situation. And so that could be a part of why he doesn't recognize David. But we'll get to all these things later. It is interesting, and I'm always glad when somebody's like actually paying attention to the verses and saying, "Oh, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. Can we resolve this?" So tonight we'll be in 1 Samuel 5 and 6, where we've been dealing with the ark. Last week, Israel was defeated by the Philistines on a couple of occasions, and the second time they captured the ark. And this was judgment because Eli and his sons were wicked men. They were not respecting the sacrifices in the Lord's temple or house, or what I like to call his palace. The tabernacle is his palace. And it's his home, it's his dwelling, and it's his rules. And they didn't respect those rules. And because of that, Eli, his 2 sons, and his daughter-in-law all died on the same day, which is a pretty bad day. Not as bad as Job's day. Right? Job had all 10 of his children die in one day. Okay, that's what about suffering. And Job, that didn't happen because of anything that Job did. This did happen because of Eli's failure to correct his sons and his sons' wickedness. And on that same day, the ark was captured. Right? And so the glory of God departed from Israel. Why? Because they were stealing God's glory. And that was the lesson, right? Is since they were stealing God's glory, God disciplined them. We should never try to take the glory away from God and say, "Oh, look at me. Look at all that I am. Look at all that I've contributed to the Church of Jesus Christ. I'm so great, and I'm just non-negotiable. I mean, without me, this whole church thing would just fall apart," or something like that. No. It would go on without you just fine. Okay? Because God is the God of the universe, and He gifts people in certain ways, and nothing is going to stop Him from doing what He wants to accomplish. Okay? And if one person's failing, guess what He'll do? He'll raise up someone right in their place, and they will carry on. So we can never get stuck on ourselves. That's what happened to Eli and his sons. They all thought they were so great. Okay, well, God shut it down, and that was the end of that. In their place, he's raising up someone else, and that someone else is Samuel. Right? So there's the whole thing. Now, today, what's going to happen, of course, the ark has been taken by the Philistines. It's going to make a circuit. You may see the map here, and you can kind of see by following the orange lines on this map the circuit of the ark. So it was taken from Aphek in the north. Where's my pen? It was taken in the north at Aphek. Then it travels. It's going to go to Ashdod, which was the chief city of the Philistines. They're going to say, "Oh, we don't like this. Everybody's dying. Let's take it to Gath." And they all start dying. And then they take it to Ekron. Everybody there says, "What are you doing? Whoa, 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 whoa. We know what happens if you bring the ark." And then they start dying and having all sorts of, we'll talk about what the tumors are and so forth. And eventually they decide to send it back to Israel, to a place called Beth Shemesh, and eventually to Kiriath Jearim. But the ark originally departed from Shiloh. There's the big question, why didn't it go back to Shiloh? That's where the tabernacle was. So we'll discuss a little bit about that. So what we're going to learn then basically is that God is using the ark as it journeys here to teach the Philistines a certain lesson. And then when it returns to Israel, he's going to teach Israel a specific lesson. Okay? So let's start in chapter 5, verse 1. Now the Philistines, they took the ark of God, they brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Okay, so that's up around Aphek. The Israelites were at Ebenezer, the Philistines had set up their soldiers at Aphek, and they met at a battle in between. Philistines won, they took the ark. Okay? So verse 1 is explaining that they took it now from Ebenezer, this area, about 30 miles south and a little bit west, so south-southwest, to the city of Ashdod, which was the chief city of the Philistines. They had 5 major cities: Ashdod, Gath, Ekron. You can't see the others, but anyway, there's 5 major cities. They each had a lord, so they had 5 major lords over these cities. And then number 5 becomes the portion of the story. So, verse 1, they take it from Ebenezer to Ashdod, and then this is like they've captured Israel's gods. Like, oh, look at us, we're so powerful. Look at us. Ooh. Okay. Then the Philistines took the ark of God, and they brought it to the house of Dagon, and they set it by Dagon. So Dagon was the chief god of the Philistines. Okay. His name is most likely from the Hebrew word Dagon, which means grain. Okay. So as a word that means grain, he's a fertility god. And Ugaritic literature that was discovered by archaeologists says that Dagon was the father of Baal. And we know Baal, the Canaanite god, who was also a fertility god, and all the messed up stuff there. So, that's where they placed the ark. They took it and they put it in the temple of Dagon. Okay, so they had a religious system built around this god of grain. They've got priests, they've got diviners, they've got sacrifices, and of course a temple dedicated to Dagon. Supposedly the one who brings them a bountiful harvest. Okay, well, so we're going to find out, well, does he supply a bountiful harvest or not? Verse 3, when the Ashdodites arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. Have you read this story before? So that's a little bit embarrassing, right? So they took Dagon and set him in his place again, which is a little embarrassing that your own God can't pick himself up. Right? You have to pick him up. But that's the nature of idolatry. All idols are just projections of human imagination, the flesh's imagination. And so they have attributed to him certain abilities, but it's obvious he's not a god. It's obvious that Yahweh is superior to Dagon, because Dagon was with his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they set it up again, verse 4. But when they arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord again. Okay? And the head of Dagon this time, and both the palms of his hands were cut off on the threshold, so that only the trunk of Dagon was left. Okay, now he had fallen on his face to the ground. This is the second time we've read that phrase. By the way, this is the same phrase that's used when David kills Goliath with a stone, a stick sling and stone. It says he fell on his face to the ground before David, who was Yahweh's champion. Right? So the point is supremacy of Yahweh over Dagon. Okay? This time, of course, now we have the head is cut off, and the hands, both the palms of his hands are cut off. This signified in the Old Testament what they would do after you won a battle is you cut the heads and the hands off of your enemy soldiers, the ones that you died. So you could count them, to know how many you had killed. Okay? 1 Samuel 29:4 discusses this, and Judges 8:6 discusses this. The head and the hands were cut off specifically for memory those you killed. Later, what's David going to do? After he strikes him with the stone in the forehead and embeds himself there and he falls face to the ground in front of David, then David comes up and what does he do? He cuts his head off. Okay. And what happens when King Saul is killed? Later in the book of 1 Samuel. But they cut off his head and take his body and nail it to the wall at Bet-shan. Okay? So this is common to cut off the head of your enemies. And so what is this saying with the head of Dagon? And both his palms are cut off, except that Yahweh had defeated Dagon. Okay? That is the entire point. Now, when it fell over, all that is left now is just this portion, right? And it crashed on the threshold. And the priests of Dagon now considered the thresholds sanctified or holy, and so they would not walk on or touch this surface anymore for fear of touching on the holiness of Dagon, who had quite obviously been defeated by Yahweh. So who is really holy but Yahweh? But they're still honoring and respecting Dagon by not stepping on this threshold. By the way, the Jews, if you go to the land of Israel today and you go up on the Temple Mount, there are many Orthodox Jews who will not go on the Temple Mount. And the reason is because of fear of stepping on the threshold of Solomon's square platform. Okay? So when Solomon built the temple, it was a perfect square. 500 cubits by 500 cubits. And of course, in the time of Christ, it's bigger because Herod enlarged it. And Hashmoneans enlarged it too prior to Herod. But the point is that they are so afraid that they might step on that 500 cubit foot square that they won't even go on the Temple Mount. Okay? For fear of touching the threshold and invading God's holy space. Okay? So that is something like this. They don't want to step on that space anymore. And so we now come to verse 6. Okay? And here's an interesting phrase that we've seen before, but I'm going to introduce it in a little more detail. Verse 6 says, "Now the hand of the Lord was heavy on the Ashdodites, and he wrapped them in smoke and with tumors, both Ashdod and its territories." Okay, that phrase at the beginning, I know you want to talk about the tumors. But the hand of the Lord. Okay, that is used 9 times in this section about the ark, starting way back in chapter 4, verse 8. Okay? Who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods, by which they were referring to Yahweh, they didn't know which was from God. But the hand of. Okay, it is the key phrase in chapters 4 through 7. Like I said, it's used 9 times. It's used in 4:8, 5:6. Just write it down. 4:8, 5:6. It's also used in 5:7, 5:9, 5:11, 6:3, 6:5, 6:9, and 7:13. Okay? over and over, the hand of Yahweh, or the hand of the Lord, is heavy against someone. What does this mean? It's the theme of the story from chapters 4 to 7. It is a reference to Yahweh's power being active in causing someone difficulty. It's his power active in causing someone difficulty. This phrase has been used before in the Bible. The hand of Yahweh was heavy against the Egyptians in the book of Exodus. This book is used, or this phrase is used obviously 9 times for the hand of the Lord against the Philistines. It is also, interestingly, used of the hand of the Lord against David when he was out of fellowship in Psalm 32:4. Psalm 32:4. And even more interesting, perhaps, is it is used in the New Testament, Acts chapter 13, verse 11, to describe the hand of the Lord against Paul when he was blinded on the Damascus road. So it is the hand of God, meaning his active power causing difficulty for someone. In Paul's case, blindness. In David's case, the weakness of his joints when he's out of fellowship, his physical health was failing due to being out of fellowship, and so forth and so on. Okay? So the hand of the living God, it's a fearful thing to fall into that, right? The book of Hebrews tells us it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And yet the Philistines here were falling into the hands of the living God. Now that they have the ark amongst them. So what are these tumors? That's the difficulty he was causing. It's variously translated. In some places it's called sores, in other places it's called hemorrhoids in some translations. In the King James it's called hemorrhoids, which is sort of like hemorrhoids. It's called plague of tumors in the New Living Translation, and in another translation, growths on the skin. The Hebrew word means a thickening of the skin. A thickening of the skin, particularly in the groin area. Or let's just say the secret parts. Secret parts. Yeah, this is instead of reading commentary. I think I should use that. That's kind of interesting. The secret parts. A thickening of skin in the groin or the secret parts. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible there, adds something, a long phrase that's not in your Bible. It says, in addition to the tumors or thickening of the skin in the groin area, it says, and mice multiplied in their land, and the terror of death was throughout the entire city. The mice are actually mentioned later in the Hebrew text in chapter 6, verse 4. So we know this condition was related to mice, okay, or rodents. Okay. And this is what has led, combining the thickening of the skin with mice or rodents, this is what has led commentators to conclude that the actual condition that they had was what is the first outbreak of the Bubonic Plague. Okay. Also known as Black Death because it caused the death of tissue, which due to gangrene, and the tissue itself turned black. So Black Death was another term for Bubonic Plague. At any rate, the reason they make these connections is because thickening of the skin is a symptom of bubonic plague, and it was caused not by the mice, but by the fleas that were on the mice, which harbored a specific bacteria causing the condition. So, I think that it's probably correct that this was a case of bubonic plague, given the data that we have, or it's at least highly possible. And obviously a very uncomfortable condition to have these swellings of what I'm going to call buboes. Okay? You can look that up on Google. Okay, you can look buboes up. Okay, you're going to see the condition. So I think everybody should get their iPhone or Android, whatever you've got right now, some inferior Android or the superior iPhone. I think you should pull that out right now and type in buboes just so you can see what this was. Because it's not what you want to have. I know what you're going to be doing tonight, so don't need to send me any information. Okay, a very uncomfortable condition, and it had been caused by the hand of the Lord, which we'll see 9 times. Verse 7, when the men of Ashdod saw that it was so, that's a poor translation, it just means when the men of Ashdod saw what was happening, they're like, uh-oh, this isn't good. So they said, the ark of God of Israel must not remain with us here in Ashdod, for his hand is severe on us. There it is again, his hand is severe, see? On us, and not only us, on Dagon, our God. Do they admit that Yahweh is superior to Dagon? Yes, they do. I mean, in fact, the hand of the Lord is severe. He's causing distress to Dagon himself by cutting his head off in his palms. So, what are the Philistines supposed to do? Reject Dagon and believe in the God of Israel. And this is his grace. He is actually showing them, hey, Dagon, not a God. I am God. The God of Israel is the one true God. Believe in me. So the Lord is, let's just say, evangelizing at this point, the Philistines. Okay? Verse 8, so they sent and gathered all the lords of the Philistines to them, and they said, all right, what are we going to do with the ark of the God of Israel? And they said, well, let the ark of the God of Israel be brought around to Gath. So the people of Ashdod thought, well, maybe the God of Israel is just angry with the city of Ashdod, so let's send him to another city. As if you can send God to another city. You know, I mean, the ark is just a box. It doesn't mean he's containing it. Okay? But that's their perception of this God, is that he is confined to this little coffin, and but he's still superior to Dagon. So they send him to another city. Okay, so let the ark of God be brought around to Gath, and they brought the ark of the God of Israel around. And after they had brought it around, guess what? What does it say next? The hand of the Lord. Every time you should underline that. Okay, so 4:8, 5:6, right? 5:7, 5:9. Okay, so that when you come back here, 19 years from now, you read 1 Samuel. You can, oh yeah, the hand of the Lord. Yes, over and over. You just see it when you come across here again. I'm a proponent of writing in your Bible. Okay, write in the Bible because it helps you as you read it later. The hand of the Lord was against the city of Gath now, with very great confusion. And he smote the men of the city, both young and old, so that tumors, there's that word again, opel in Hebrew, which we said is like a symptom of Bubonic Plague, broke out on them. Okay, but then there's a Hebrew word there, broke out. You see that? This is another one you want to underline, you want to mark, you want to highlight, whatever you do in your inductive Bible study. Broke out is used only one time in the entire Hebrew Old Testament. This is it. And it means to burst out or to burst forth. And this is why people think that it's hemorrhoids. Because what happens in hemorrhoids? But part of your colon bursts out of your secret parts. Okay? See, I've got you all involved. It's so wonderful. You're involved in the Bible. I love this. I love this. To get people involved in the Bible like they're supposed to be involved in the Bible. It's bursting out the secret parts, okay? And this is another thing that's associated with bubonic plague, so we think this is probably bubonic plague. This is just a symptom of it, okay? It's being described here. It was very uncomfortable for them. Obviously. If you're younger, you may not know that. If you're older, you probably do know that. No charge for that. Verse 10. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron. Okay, this is the third city, right? Third Philistine city they sent it to. And as the ark of God came to Ekron, the Ekron said, hey, wait a minute here. What do you think? Because they see the pattern, right? This isn't just against one city like Ashdod because they have done something wrong. It doesn't matter what the city is. If you bring this thing here, people are going to get bubonic plague, have hemorrhoids in their secret parts, and die. Okay? And so they said they brought the ark of God of Israel around to us to kill us and our people. So people weren't just getting this condition, they were also dying. Okay? And it says, verse 11, they sent therefore and gathered all the lords of the Philistines, and they said, send away the ark of God of Israel. Just let it return to its own place so that it will not kill us and our people. But here's the deal. Did they have to die? No. No more than Rahab had to die within the walls of Jericho. Because there's always a way of escape, and that is believing in the one true God of Israel. But they didn't want to do that. They wanted to send them away. And so they weren't spared, right? It says then, for there was a deadly confusion throughout the city, and it says again, there it is, the hand of God was very heavy there. Okay? Because they've had revelation in Ashdod, the God of Israel is the one true God. They've had it now in Gath, and so now it's even more revelation. The hand of God is very heavy there. It's just like the story in the book of Exodus, right? You've got plagues, and what happens to the severity of the plagues? It increases, right? And what happens in the book of Revelation with the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls? There's an escalation. Why? Because people become harder and harder as they reject more and more, and so God gives more and more intense revelation, giving people an opportunity to believe in Him. Okay, but they're just saying no. Okay? But the hand of God was very heavy there. Underline the phrase again. Verse 12, and the men who did not die were smitten with tumors and loins, or whatever you want to call it. And the cry of the city went up to heaven. Look that up tonight. Look up buboes. Okay? And so you can get an idea of what you would be dealing with. Okay? Notice the cry of the city went up to heaven. I just want to make note of that because this has happened before. In the book of Exodus, when the Israelites were being forced to build Pharaoh's kingdom, and the bondage became so great, it says they cried out, and their cry went up to heaven. And remember, it says the Lord heard, and He remembered His covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and He set out to deliver them. So this phrase has been used before, and notice that at this point, even God is hearing the Philistines cry out for help. Okay, we come to chapter 6, and they are done experimenting with the ark. They don't want to do that anymore. They've had enough of the buboes, and I had to use that word because I thought that is just such a good word. Now, chapter 6, verse 1 tells us that the ark of the Lord had been in the country of the Philistines 7 months. A little over half a year. And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners, saying, what shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Okay, priests and diviners. These are common in all pagan countries that have pagan religions. They'll have priests and they'll have diviners. Remember in Egypt? Joseph was in Egypt. He was rejected by his brothers, sold into slavery, and he ends up being the top dog in Egypt. But while they were there, they said there were some people who wanted to know a dream, and they said, hey, there's this guy we know, he's in prison. He has a spirit of divination within him. So the Egyptians were very familiar with the art and practice of divination. They also, of course, had priests, as you discover in that story. And so this was a common feature. Also in the book of Daniel, right? The book of Daniel, you have the magicians and the conjurers. In fact, Daniel was being trained to be one of these magicians and conjurers. And it was considered to be within a spirit of divination, although, of course, it was not. But this was a common feature, and we see it here among the Philistines. They're very pagan. But these people were well respected. The priests, the diviners, they were the upper class, they were wealthy, and they, of course, their counsel was sought. So the Philistines asked them, what shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we shall send it to its place. Not should we send it to its place, but how do we do it? What's the proper procedure to send the ark back to Israel? And they said, if you send away the ark of the God of Israel, don't send it empty, but you shall surely return to him a guilt offering. That would be an admission of guilt, right?
which is interesting, that the priests and diviners admit guilt. Okay, so don't send the ark back empty. Send it with a guilt offering. They say, then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand, there it is again, that phrase again, his hand is not removed from you. Then you'll know. So you'll gain special insight or knowledge, mystery knowledge, of the God of Israel, right, and why you have come under his hand. Okay. Then they said, okay, well, what shall be the guilt offering which we shall return to him? And you probably remember this part of the story, but you don't know maybe why. Like, what are they thinking? How is this going to accomplish anything? And they said, here's what you send with the ark. 5 golden tumors. Okay, these buboes. And I need you to kick out of that like me. And 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For 1 plague was on all of you and on your lords. So 5 for the number of lords who ruled over 5 cities, the 5 chief cities of the Philistines. Okay, but why are they going to make these? This they're models. Okay, they're basically golden casts of the buboes and mice. And here we are. Here the mice are mentioned. Remember, I said earlier in Hebrew text it didn't say mice, but the Septuagint did. But there were mice. Okay. And so they're going to make 5 of these buboes and 5 golden mice. Okay? Verse 5 tells us, so you shall make likenesses of your buboes and likenesses of your mice that ravage the land. And by the way, that's the first time we're told that the land was ravaged. Up to this point, we just thought, well, these people have these buboes all over them. That's very uncomfortable. But we also learned that their land has been ravaged. So is their land fertile? Are they getting a bountiful harvest? But I thought that's what Dagon was, a god of fertility. I thought he could provide all that. So what's the Lord saying? What's God saying? Dagon doesn't provide fertility and blessing. I do. I'm the one. I'm the only one who's ever given you anything. It's worth looking just one place here. Acts 17. We'll come back to these models. Acts 17. When Paul was in Athens, his spirit was stirred up within him because he was walking throughout the city known for its great intellect, all this philosophy. Okay, and yet they've got all these gods everywhere, and there's one that's dedicated to an unknown God in Acts 17. But look how Paul, when he gets his chance to address the philosophers of the day, known as the Areopagus, notice what he says about where we get everything, and which would include where the Philistines got all their fertility in all the past years. Chapter 17, verse 20. Let's just do 24. 17:24. The God who made the world and all things in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, he does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor arks. Ark, like Ark of the Covenant, they can't contain it. The temple couldn't contain it. Okay. It says, verse 25, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything. That's what I mean. He doesn't need you. He doesn't need me. He just absolutely does not need us. We're here by God's grace entirely. It says, since he himself gives to all people life and breath and all things. Who gave the Philistines all their fertility according to this verse? Their bountiful harvest. Their numerous cows and sheep and whatever else they needed for agricultural produce for living. God gave them all of that. Okay? And that's why we need him. He doesn't need us. We need him. Because everything you have, everything you see, everything you are, is totally given you by God. What does Job say? Naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return. Blessed be the name of the Lord. What does that mean? That means that anything you have between birth and death, you have, in addition to what you came into this world with, and in addition to what you will go out of this world with. You have more now than you had the day you were born. You have more now than you had the day you go out of this world. Unless you believe in Christ, in which you have all the riches But the point being that the Philistines never got a thing from Dagon. That God, by His grace, has been sustaining them for their entire duration of their lives. And Dagon had never done anything for them. And yet they had given the glory that belonged to God to Dagon. So, they're in a little trouble. Heap trouble. Okay? So they make, the priests say, okay, you want to appease this God, you need to give a guilt offering. You're going to have these 5 golden tumors, models of them, these buboes, and 5 golden mice, 5 models of those. What is that? Why are they doing this? We think this is a case in the ancient world of what's called sympathetic magic. Sympathetic magic. You can look it up on witchcraft.com or whatever, because I know about these things. It might help you understand some things that go on in movies, too. You see these things in movies. You see magic, but you don't know what exactly it is they're trying to do. Sympathetic magic, basically, in one sense, there's lots of aspects to it. But you make a model of the thing that is causing trouble, and then you send it away in hopes that it will go away with the models. Okay? So it's a way of trying to produce causation away from you, to cause something to move away from you. So they're going to make models of the buboes and models of the mice and send them away. And the hope is that as they go away, the plagues will go away from them. Okay? The mice and the buboes will go away from them. Okay? So this is a form of magic. You can see these people are deeply pagan. We shouldn't be surprised. So the end of verse 5 says, perhaps He will ease His hand, there it is again, He will ease His hand from you, your gods, and your land. So fertility will return. But the obvious thing these priests and diviners ought to be saying is, we ought to believe in this God. If this God is that powerful, why would we want to go back to Dagon, who got his head cut off and his palms cut off, and he fell over? But they didn't. But God's being gracious, giving them false revelation. They even say in verse 6, why then do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? This is their own priest saying this. And they know the history of Israel and Egypt. They know the history of Pharaoh hardening his heart. It's remarkable. This is like 400 years later almost. 300 years, excuse me. So why do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and the Pharaohs hardened their hearts? When He had severely dealt with them, did they not allow the people to go out of Egypt, right? And the people of Israel, they departed. So they're using that as an analogy. Well, He let the people go. We should let the mice and the buboes go. The way we do that is we use sympathetic magic. We make models of the mice and models of the buboes, and we send them, and then hopefully they'll go away from us. And just as Egypt was relieved, so we'll be relieved. Okay, that's their argument. Verse 7, now therefore take and prepare a new cart and 2 milch cows on which there has never been a yoke, and hitch the cows to the cart and take their calves home away from them. Okay, this is their, let's just read a little bit more. Take the ark of the Lord, place it on the cart, and put the articles of gold, which you returned to Him, the 5 mice and the 5 buboes, right, as a guilt offering, in a box by the side of the ark. Then send it away that it may go. Okay, now watch it, they say. Watch it. If it goes up by the way of its own territory to Beth Shemesh, which was in Israel, then He, the God of Israel, has done us this great evil. But if not, we know that it was not His hand, there it is again, His hand that struck us. It just happened by chance. Okay, so this is their test to see if these calamities that had befallen them actually came from the God of Israel. So here it is. You're going to take these 2 milch cows. And if you're me, you're like, what in the world's a milch cow? Okay, so that's a mother who's nursing her calves. And you're going to send the calves home. And then you're going to put a yoke on these 2 nursing mother cows. Okay? And you'll put the ark and all that on there. Okay? See which way they go. We're going to see what happens here. Which way do they go? Now, I do know enough about mother cows, and some of you do too, that when they got a baby calf and they get separated, what does the mommy do? Yeah, she starts bawling and she's doing anything she can to try to find her calves. And the first place she's going to go home. And that's where it said they were going to put the calves. They're going to send the calves home into verse 7. Okay? So that's exactly where the mama cows are going to go, right? Home, and they're going to be bawling all the way. Because we all know that from nature. Okay? So they say, now if they don't go that way, but they go straight to Israel, up to Beth Shemesh, we'll know this all happened because the God of Israel's hand was against us. Okay, so plus you put a yoke on them. They've never had a yoke on them. What are the mother's going to do with that? They're going to want to fight their way free. Okay, so everything they're set up in the experiment is, going to be plain. It's going to be plain where this came from. So verse 10, then the men did so. They took 2 milch cows. They hitched them to the cart. They shut up their calves at home. Okay, baby calves at home. They're bond. Mom's going to start bond, right? They put the ark of the Lord on the cart. They put the box with the golden mice and the likeness of their tumors, or bulos. And the cows took the straight way in the direction of Beth Shemesh. Look how it says that. Nothing here is extra. So they took the straight way in the direction of Beth Shemesh. In other words, the straightest route you could go on, that's the route they took. Okay? And they went along the highway, lowing as they went. There they are, lowing, calling out for their calves. But they're not going toward home, are they? Which is so interesting. Makes me think of the animals that went to the ark. Noah didn't go get the animals and bring them to the ark. That's one of the criticisms of the ark and the animals. It's like, well, how did Noah get all those animals? Well, did you read the Bible? God brought them there, and put these homing devices and all those things in animals. I mean, what is going on out there? It's super amazing. It's super complex. The Arctic Tern, and you research and study all this stuff. It's just the majesty of the glory of God. He's done all this. Okay? And so here he's got these mama cows, and they're bawling like they normally would, but they're going straight away from their calf, and they're going straight to Israel. The path they took is through Timnah. It's on here on map. By Timnah. Okay? Through the Sorek Valley. Timnah is the place where Samson's first girl that he fell in love with was from. She was a Philistine from Timnah. So they're going to take that route. And then the second girl that Samson fell in love with was from the Sorek Valley. There they passed through that. Her name was Delilah. Okay? So it just gives you a little context for Judges 13 through 16. Anyway, so they take that route back. They go straight to Beth Shemesh. Okay? Lowing as they went. And it says they didn't turn aside to the right or to the left. I mean, it was very clear who had sent the calamities upon the Philistines. It says, and the lords of the Philistines followed them to the border of Beth Shemesh. Let me just make sure. Right, we're going to go all the way. Now, the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. And they raised their eyes, and they saw the ark, and they were glad to see it. It's coming back. So the cart came into the field of Joshua, the Beth Shemite, and stood there where there was a large stone, and they split the wood of the cart, and they offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. So that they knew enough not to touch the ark, or these people did. They're just, okay, let's just, it's a burnt offering, which is the whole offering. It's atonement, for atonement. Verse 15, the Levites took down the ark of the Lord. So Beth Shemesh was actually a Levitical town. There's 48 cities that they were given. This is one of them in the book of Joshua. This one is listed. And there were actually Levites that lived there. So the Levites took down the ark of the Lord, and the box that was with it. It had the articles of gold, 5 mice and 5 bulos. And they put them on the large stone, and the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrifices that day to the Lord. Okay, this is all good, okay? When the 5 lords of the Philistines saw it, they returned to Ekron that day. Now, before we go on and read everything that's about to happen here at the very end of the chapter, remember, God was revealing himself to the Philistines. He wanted them to know that Dagon was not a god. He wanted them to know that he was God. The God of Israel is the one true God. And that if they would believe in him, all this problems would go away. Okay? So, that's the lesson they were supposed to learn. Now we go to what Israel's lesson was, what they were supposed to learn when the ark returned. Says, so verse 17, these are the golden buboes which the Philistines returned for a guilt offering to the Lord. One for the city of Ashdod, one for the city of Gaza, one for Ashkelon, one for Gath, and one for Ekron. Number 5 had 5 lords. And the golden mice, 5 of them, according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines belonged to the 5 lords, both the fortified cities and their country villages. The large stone on which they set the ark of the Lord is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua the Beth Shemesh. So that stone remained there at least to the time after King Solomon, because that's when the book of 1 Samuel was, it was just Samuel. 1 and 2 Samuel was just Samuel. That's when that book was finished. Verse 19, he struck down some of the men of Beth Shemesh because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. Okay, curiosity killed the cat, right? I gotta see what's in there. I mean, I just gotta lift that lid off the ark. I gotta look in there. Either they didn't know what the book of Numbers teaches. The book of Numbers teaches, Numbers chapter 5, verse 5, 15 through 20. You don't touch the ark unless, first of all, the only people who are supposed to touch it were the Kohathites, the descendants of Kohath. They would cover the articles. I know you see it in movies, they're probably just carrying it along and all this stuff. No. That's not real. That's just a movie. Okay, or a picture. They had to cover them all. Okay? And then cover them. Or then carry them. Nobody was supposed to be, peeking under the lid to see what's in there. Look, okay, so he struck down of all the people 50,070 men. Okay, and the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great slaughter. Now, that number is debated. What I mean by that is that most of the Masoretic texts that we have that actual number, 50,070. But the Septuagint, the Greek translation, has 70, just 70. And Josephus, in his History of the Jews, has 70. Okay? And we do have to admit, 50,070 is a big number. Okay? Then the end of the verse, though, says, people mourn because the Lord has struck the people with a great slaughter. So you have to ask yourself, is 70 a great slaughter? And you have to, I don't know, because the manuscript evidence is kind of difficult to weigh. So I'm not sure which is the proper manuscript evidence. But at any rate, people died because they looked in the heart. You weren't supposed to do that. The men of Beth Shemesh said, here's the lesson they were supposed to learn. Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? The Philistines, in other words, they learned that Israel's God was the sovereign God, the one true God, and they should believe in him. Israel was to learn about the holiness of God. He's to be respected and honored. Okay? So these chapters are doing what? They are ways of showing us how God taught people who he was by his works in history. Okay? This is one way that God teaches. He doesn't always just teach by telling. He often teaches by showing. And we have in schools, show and tell. Okay, well he's showing himself to be the one true God, right? Dagon's no God. You shouldn't believe in Dagon, that's a waste of time. There's no fertility blessing from him. He's just a figment of your imagination. I cut his head off. I cut his palms off. Ugh. It's stupid. Okay, just like evolution and the gods of chance and mutation over time. Those are just gods. Chance, mutation, time. It's just gods. False gods that people have set up in their brain to try to explain reality. That's what they were doing. Why are our fields so fertile? Oh, it's got to be because of Dagon, the rain god. Can you imagine their own mind? The guy we have to pick up when he falls down. It's silly. Evolution is just as silly, folks. It is just as silly. And when I say evolution, I mean in the macro sense, macroevolution. When I talk about cosmic evolution, I talk about chemical evolution, I talk about biological evolution. We can talk about microevolution.
Christians don't have a problem with that. We observe this. This is something that's observable. It's just minor changes in the DNA of an organism that give rise to specific allelic populations that dominate.
It doesn't have anything to do, though, with like salamanders becoming lizards, okay, or whales becoming coyotes, or birds becoming dinosaurs, okay, or whatever, okay. None of that. That is just total hokiness, okay. It's as dumb as thinking that Dagon was making your crops grow. Okay, it really is that dumb. In fact, it's probably dumber. And when evolution is told to Africans, you know what they do? They totally laugh at Western Americans for believing that. They think it's just what is the dumbest thing we've ever heard? We live out here. We know it doesn't work like that. Those people live in cities and play on computers. We live in nature. It doesn't work like that, folks.
So, anyway, this is what people do, though. And the point is that God was showing them that that's just hokey. Believe in me. Now, with Israel, what's he want them to believe? That he is holy. They have to relearn the holiness of God. Okay?
And they learned it because a lot of people died by looking
in the ark. He has to be respected. And so they asked in verse 21 or 20, and to whom shall he go up from us? In other words, what are we going to do with the ark? So they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kiriath-Jearim, saying, the Philistines have brought back the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it. They wanted to go to this place called Kiriath-Jearim. It's not that far from Beth-Shemesh. You can see it there here on the map. It's just down the road.
And it's going to remain there. It's actually going to go there in the next chapter. It's going to stay there until King David brings it to Jerusalem in 2 Samuel 6. Okay? So, what can we learn from all this? First of all, the capture of the ark resulted in the Philistines recognizing, hey, Yahweh, the God of Israel, is sovereign. He is the true source of fertility and blessing. But they still didn't believe in him, and they should have. So God was gracious to them. He was giving them an opportunity to respond to him, as he always does. Second thing, Israelites were having to relearn God's holiness, that God must be respected, okay? That he's not to be treated lightly. Okay? Now, just like Israel can forget these truths, guess what? We can forget these truths. Okay? The Philistines tried to manipulate God by sending over there, or sending this guilt offering of bullocks and mice. It's all manipulations. Okay? You can't manipulate God. Okay? You can't trick him into doing what you want him to do. He's not a man that he can be tricked and manipulated. We often try to trick him into giving us what we want. You can't do that. Okay? He's going to do whatever he's going to do, and he's consistent with himself always. Okay? So that's important lesson. Don't try to manipulate God. Okay? Know who he is. He's also holy. And I think this is one of our weakest spots, one of the weakest attributes in Christianity is really understanding the holiness of God. This attribute means that God is, say this bluntly, absolutely pure. And I'm going to tell you right now, we have no concept of that because there's nothing in our world that we look at tangibly, see, feel, touch that's absolutely pure. So it's very difficult for us to get our minds around absolute purity. And in one sense, that is totally terrifying. And in another sense, it's totally beautiful. That's who he is. But he is absolute purity. So we need to really latch on to that. The third thing and the main thing to learn about the Ark's journey is that in the storyline of 1 Samuel, is that the God of Israel is obviously all they needed. That is so clear. Let me ask you a question. In 2 chapters, they're going to ask for a king, like all the other nations. Do they need that? If we don't get that out of the story, we miss the entire reason chapters 4 through 7 are here. These chapters are to show us that Israel does not need anything except God as their king. And yet, they said, we want a king like all the other nations. And that's why Samuel is so disappointed when they ask that.
Because he realizes the truth that I hope you all recognize. And that's that you don't need anything but God at all. What does it in Romans 8 say? Who can bring a charge against God's elect? If God is for us, who can be against us? And that's the lesson Israel needs to learn at this point. It's a lesson they obviously did not learn. Because they say, no, we don't want God's kingdom. We want one like the Philistines had, or like the Egyptians had, or the Moabites, or the Ammonites. What they really wanted was just an idol, more than anything. Is it something fake? Sad story. Let's not fall into those traps. We don't need anything more than the greatness of God. He's all we need. Let's pray. Father, thank you for these lessons. The New Testament tells us that these things are written that we may learn from their example. In 1 Corinthians 10, 11. Not to do these things. Not to do like Israel. Not to want a king like all the other nations. Not to fall into that idolatry. But to just want you because you're enough. You're sufficient. And the problem is not with you. The problem is with us. Is that we can't get it when we want it or what we want exactly, and we try to manipulate and distort and change everything, and we just make a mess of our lives because we're trying to do that. We're not willing to accept what you have for us. So help us to be patient. Help us to wait. This book is about waiting. It's about waiting for you to come through on our behalf. Being patient. So help us to learn these lessons so that we do honor you as the only one that we need. We ask this in Jesus' name. Okay. What prayer requests? In addition to Dave Wilson and the home situation Damon over here, and then of course Ruby Kennedy and Todd. And yeah, what's going on, John? Could be what, tendon? She's not talking about horses, is she? She's what? Okay, so pray for Melinda Houston on that night. And shoulder issues, and maybe some tendon issues back to her. And we don't want to forget about air conditioning. AC, thank you, JC. Okay. Anything else? This country always, right? The United States of America, our military, the church in the United States of America and around the world, to uphold truth and not get into silly marketing ideas or whatever. Just teach truth, love people, right? Yes. Several people in your family have had problems after they've taken the vaccine, right? Is that right? They're discovering other health problems. I'm just going to say it's not exactly like the powers that be want more people in the world. You know that. Long. Unknown. So we can be thankful for people who do want to keep people alive and give people a long chance to grow and become believers or grow in Christ. Right? Okay. Anything else? Okay. Well, let's break up and go pray. Take these things to the Lord. He's the answer to him. I think he can answer that question.
exciting.